I'm going to go ahead and introduce us all. So my name is Anna. I am the Electric Vehicle Program Director at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are a nonprofit organization that works at the state level in Massachusetts and also Rhode Island to empower consumers and communities to speed a just transition to a zero carbon world. So we both run programs that help people access various clean energy technologies. And then we also do public policy advocacy work like this to make sure we've got smart, clean energy policies on the books and being implemented. I'm joined today by my colleague Tina, who will be in the chat. So if you have any questions, Tina is there to help answer them throughout the webinar. But I'll ask Dave to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is David Reichmuth. I'm a senior scientist with the Union of Concerned Scientists, and my expertise is in the area of light-duty electrification, so that's passenger cars and trucks. And I'm speaking to you today from Oakland, California. Um, and I can pass it to Kathy.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kathy Harris. I'm the Director of Clean Vehicles here at the Natural Resources Defense Council, or NRDC. I lead up our team, which is helping to accelerate the transition to cleaner and zero-emission vehicles all across the country. Great to see you all today. And I'll pass it over to Andrea.
Hi, everybody. I'm Andrea Marpilero-Colomina. I'm a policy advisor at Green Latinos. Green Latinos is a national nonprofit organization that focuses on the climate and conservation priorities of Latino communities and seeks to reduce pollution harm in all communities with an emphasis on disproportionate harms to Latino communities, low-income communities, and other communities of color. And my work focuses in the sector of clean transportation and energy. Great to be here with all of you.
I'm very grateful to all three of you for joining us today. We are going to basically be passing the mic back and forth throughout this whole presentation, but our agenda is broken up into basically three sections. So in the first one, we'll talk about why these clean car regulations, Advanced Clean Cars 2 or ACC 2, are so critical for our climate and our health. In the second section, we'll talk about how automakers and the fossil fuel industry are attacking ACC 2 at both the national and the state level, but that Massachusetts is ready for implementation. That's a message we really want to underline with this webinar today. And then we'll have some time for Q&A, but then in the third section, we will take some time to take action together. So we'll walk through how to send an email or make a phone call to the governor's office to get the message across that we cannot delay ACC 2 at this time. I already want to hand the mic back to Andrea real quick for a note on World Asthma Day.
Sure. We just wanted to quickly highlight that this coming Tuesday, May 6th, is World Asthma Day. And this seems like a really timely tie-in to the importance of ACC2 in Massachusetts, given that about 1 in 11 people in Massachusetts currently has asthma. And in Massachusetts, as in many other states, people of color, particularly in Massachusetts, African Americans and Black people face disproportionate rates of asthma. So just something to frame some of the conversation we'll be having about human health impacts from tailpipe emissions as we move this conversation forward today. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll add that the American Lung Association just last week released one of their annual reports on air quality, and it shows that air quality in New England has declined in the past couple of years, which just again underlines the need to shift away from burning fossil fuels as quickly as possible to reduce those negative health impacts. So with that, we will launch into our first section about how ACC2 is critical for our climate and our health. But before we do that, I do want to acknowledge some developments on the federal level, and for that, I'll turn it over to Kathy.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, just wanted to set the stage and address the elephant in the room. I know that there's been a lot of press today about a vote that happened this morning at the U.S. House of Representatives that is using the Congressional Review Act, or trying to use the Congressional Review Act, I should say, to revoke California's waivers on this program, as well as the Advanced Clean Trucks and Advanced Clean Cars and Heavy-Duty Omnibus rules. So, we're still continuing to monitor what's happening at the federal level on this. the waivers are still on the books. And I think what this really ultimately, and we can't predict what will continue to happen, but what we can talk about today, and that's the point of this webinar is that right now, Massachusetts is part of the Advanced Clean Cars 2 program, and there's significant benefits to this program that we'll talk through today. And what is vital is for the Commonwealth to continue to stay strong on these standards, to send a really clear signal to the industry that we are all in on a transition to cleaner vehicles, as the transportation sector is such a large source of health harming pollution. And these regulations allow for Massachusetts to take head on the effects of this pollution that's affecting our communities and our residents. And so it's really important that we continue to hold the line and continue to have these regulations on the books to ensure that we can help to accelerate this transition towards these cleaner vehicles, and help to reduce the harm that the sector can cause to our residents in the Commonwealth.
With that, we're going to go straight into what is ACCII? What are we talking about? And for that, we'll go back to Kathy.
Yeah, so just to help level set and to set the stage here, the Advanced Clean Cars 2 regulation is a regulation that was adopted by Massachusetts back in 2023, along with 11 other states have also adopted this program. And I should note that, so this regulation, under the Federal Clean Air Act, California is allowed to set standards that are stronger than the federal government's in terms of vehicle emission standards. So this Advanced Clean Cars 2 program is a continuation of programs that California has implemented over the past several decades. It's called ACCII because this is the second version of this kind of clean cars component. Right now, Advanced Clean Cars 1, which Massachusetts has also adopted, is the law on the books, and Advanced Clean Cars 2 starts in model year 2026. It's actually required by state law that Massachusetts adopts these California standards, which, as I said, are stricter than the federal government standards on tailpipe emissions. There's a section of the Clean Air Act that allows for states to choose, if they would like to adopt these stronger than federal standards, which Massachusetts has done. What this regulation does is a couple of different things. In one component of the regulation, it gradually increases the percentage of new zero emission vehicle sales requirements over a course of several years. The regulation is on the automakers, not dealerships or consumers, and there's a lot of flexibilities, which I'll talk about in the next slide, to help automakers achieve compliance for that in the Commonwealth. Importantly, though, another component that I think gets lost in a lot of the conversation is, in addition to helping to accelerate a transition to zero emission vehicles and having new zero emission vehicle sales targets, is that it also helps to reduce pollution from tailpipes. So there's a series of regulations within the larger regulation that targets reductions in nitrogen oxides and particulate matter pollutions that really help to address some of the health harming emissions that we're seeing on the roads today from the transportation sector. So it's not just this transition to zero emission vehicles, it also is helping to support to clean up the gasoline vehicles that are on our roads too, and to make those engines cleaner as well. It also importantly provides certainty for the broader electric vehicle market and helps level the playing field across states, and really sends a signal to the industry that Massachusetts is in on cleaning up our roads, and that we should continue to provide investments in Massachusetts as we continue to see this planned, phased approach transition to zero emission vehicles. If you go to the next slide, Anna. So as I said, there's a lot of flexibilities within this regulation that really do help to make ACCII feasible. I know there's been a lot of talk about this 35% sales requirement that starts in model year 2026, but I wanted to show this chart, which highlights that while that 35% may be on paper what the requirement is, there's a lot of flexibilities in the regulation that actually help to make that number in real world slightly lower. So this is not a Massachusetts specific chart, so I want to just caveat that there, but just a general pathway to show how the percentage might be lower than what is on paper. So the dotted line there is kind of what we would potentially see as a real world compliance requirement, taking into account what the actual current vehicle sales are in the different states, as well as incorporating these different flexibilities in place. So these are some of the flexibilities in this this column on the right here that just highlight the different ways for automakers to be able to actually meet those the annual requirements. These include being able to utilize different credits that Massachusetts is currently gaining under the Advanced Clean Cars 1 program, being able to start earning credits for 2 years prior to the start of the program, doing something called credit pooling, which is helping to assist across different automakers in different states. And then importantly, the regulation allows for states to have 3 years to be able to catch up to any deficits that they might need. But if they still can't achieve compliance for some reason, there also is the opportunity to purchase credits across different automakers, which is a mechanism that's built into the regulation and allows that flexibility for the leadership, auto manufacturers to be able to provide additional credits to the automakers that might be slightly farther behind the other automakers. So there's a lot more detail about this. I know we have several blogs and information, and I know Dave has done some additional analysis on what that could actually look like in Massachusetts. But for the sake of time, I am going to pass it over to my other speakers.
Thanks, Kathy. I'll jump in to situate this a little bit in broader climate policy in Massachusetts. So in Massachusetts and in the country broadly, transportation is now the largest sector source of greenhouse gas emissions. We've done a pretty good job over the last couple decades cleaning up our electricity generation sector. Still a lot of work to do there. But basically now transportation is the largest chunk of that greenhouse gas emissions pie. Dave is going to show us on the next slide exactly how much EVs reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But it's undisputable that EVs do reduce greenhouse gas emissions both on a per mile basis and over the lifetime of the vehicle. And as our electric grid in Massachusetts gets cleaner, which it's doing thanks to state policies like the Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard and the Clean Peak Standard and the Clean Energy Standard, those emissions get closer and closer to 0 grams of carbon dioxide emissions per mile every year. In Massachusetts, we've got a law on the books dating back to 2008 called the Global Warming Solutions Act, which mandates that the state reduce economy-wide emissions by certain benchmarks. It's been updated a couple times, but right now the requirement is that we reduce economy-wide emissions 50% under 1990 levels by 2030. And every couple of years, the executive agencies on energy write a clean energy and climate plan. The last one was for 2025 and 2030. And those plans detail, okay, where are we now and how are we going to get to the 50% emissions reductions by 2030 and in the future for the future benchmarks. And what that latest plan says is that we need to replace 900,000 of the 5.3 million vehicles on the road in Massachusetts with electric vehicles by 2030. So the math that they've done shows that to reduce emissions enough by 2030, we need 900,000 vehicles to switch from gas cars to EVs. And the Clean Energy and Climate Plan lays out, here are the strategies that we're going to rely on to actually meet that goal, get those 900,000 EVs on the road. And the Clean Energy and Climate Plan is really clear that ACCII is an absolutely key strategy. We cannot meet our emissions reductions requirements without it. That's not to say we should do ACCII and then wash our hands of this and be like, we're done. There's lots of complementary policies that we absolutely need. But I cannot overemphasize how critical ACCII is for meeting our 50% emissions reductions requirement by 2030. And again, as Kathy mentioned earlier, it's actually in our state law that Massachusetts adopt any clean car or clean vehicle regulations out of California if they're stricter than the federal standards. So we're required to by law, and it's very clear from our planning on the executive branch side that we need ACCII to meet the emissions reductions of the Global Warming Solutions Act. But with that, I'll pass it to Dave to talk a little bit more about exactly how much EVs do reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, thanks. So, I just want to dive in here in terms of like what are the uh, emissions benefits from switching from gasoline to electricity. So, we know that driving on electricity means much lower emissions than gasoline, but exactly how much? So, to do that, what we want to do is we want to look at all the emissions that go from either using a gasoline car or using an electric vehicle. Now, obviously, for a fully electric vehicle, it has no tailpipe, so we know that the tailpipe emissions go to zero for an electric vehicle. But we also know there are emissions right now from making electricity. And so what we have to do is compare all the emissions that come from burning gasoline and also getting that gasoline into the car, and then compare that to the emissions from making the electricity that recharges an electric vehicle. And when you do that math, what you find is driving the average electric vehicle in the Massachusetts grid has climate emissions equal to a hypothetical 127 mile per gallon gasoline car. So another way to think about that's less than 20% of the emissions from the average new gasoline vehicle sold in Massachusetts. So that's the benefit from driving an electric vehicle. And as Anna mentioned, that benefit is going to increase over time as electricity sector cleans up. This most recent data that was released earlier this year by the EPA, and it reflects the emissions from 2023. As we go on, we're going to have lower emissions. So the emissions from those electric vehicles is going to go down. We know the emissions from the gasoline vehicles are going to stay the same or maybe get worse as we go to dirtier sources of petroleum. We've also looked at sort of the lifetime climate emissions for battery electric vehicles, including the manufacture of the vehicle and disposal and recycling. And when we do that, what we find is that for both electric cars and electric trucks, there's a significant reduction in the lifetime emissions. And I show that here on the bar chart, is that we're looking at maybe about a third of the emissions from making and using an electric vehicle than a comparable gasoline car. So this is sort of the reason why we need to, if we want to hit those global warming emissions targets, if we want to reduce the damage from climate change, electric vehicles are an important solution that we can use. Anna?
Along with climate, there are public health benefits. So I'll just turn it right back to you.
Sorry. Yeah. And then, so the other, the climate benefit is important, but what's also important is the public health benefits. And so as you remove those tailpipes and as you remove gasoline refueling, you're going to reduce the amount of air pollution released in the state. And that's going to mean lower exposure to air pollution for residents. And in the specifics of that, this is data from the International Council on Clean Transportation, looking at the impacts of ACCII in Massachusetts. It's going to reduce fine particulate matter by through 2040 by 770 tons. It's also going to reduce nitrogen oxides or NOx pollution by almost 9,000 tons. And that's important because when we look at passenger cars and trucks, we're not looking at it's not smoke coming out of a tailpipe. That's not what we're. It's invisible gases. These invisible gases, like NOx, like reactive organic gases, combine in the atmosphere to make fine particulate matter. It's microscopic particles that can go deep into your lungs, cause problems like lung disease, like cardiovascular disease, but these are particles small enough to go into the bloodstream and also cause systemic problems, harm reproductive health, cognitive impairment. And so this has significant health impacts. And so reducing NOx, reducing particulate matter has benefits. And when the ICCT looked at that and looked at the sort of the monetized value of that, the annual benefit for Massachusetts in 2040 was close to $600 million. And then there was also some benefits outside of the state for air pollution that was going across the state boundaries. And so, and on top of the climate benefits, there are real and significant public health benefits from reducing tailpipe pollution from today's gasoline vehicles.
Thanks for that overview, Dave. We'll now turn to Andrea because the current harms are not distributed equally at all.
Thank you. So one thing to really consider when we're thinking about the public health benefits of implementing a policy like ACCII and reducing tailpipe harms from vehicles is the fact that these harms are not equally distributed. Analysis from the Union of Concerned Scientists found that people of color and low-income people in Massachusetts are exposed basically across the board to much higher fine particulate matter, PM 2.5 pollution rates from cars, trucks, and buses than white residents. And similar data finds that almost 70% of white residents live in areas below in areas with PM 2.5 concentrations below the state average, where people of color live in areas with higher concentrations than the state average. And this is potentially harmful, obviously, for the very reasons that Dave points it out on the previous slide, but really policies like ACCII can be incredibly valuable tools in reducing these pollution burdens and reducing the disproportionate harms from pollution to communities that are already vulnerable to pollution, already facing poor health outcomes, have higher asthma rates, have higher rates of heart disease, lung disease, et cetera. So this component of it, the equity component of it, is incredibly important to take into consideration when thinking about the public health benefits of implementation of such a policy. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. We'll end this section with one note about consumers. So Green Energy Consumers Alliance, we are an alliance of consumers. And a lot of the discourse around ACCII, I think, has been missing this point that adopting this policy is about making sure that people have more choice, not less. So as Kathy mentioned, there have been previous versions of ACCII, like ACCII and the ZEV regulations. And what we've seen from the past is that automakers deliver more EV models to states that have adopted these clean vehicle standards like ACCII. There are plenty of vehicles that we've been running our program for electric vehicles since 2016. Over that time, there were plenty of cool vehicles that we read about that are only available in California, and then come over to ACCII states but are not available in other parts of the country. So we want to make sure that more people have access to a variety of electric vehicles, because if you've ever attended one of our Electric Vehicle 101 presentations, EVs reduce fuel costs and maintenance costs for drivers. And if we want to make sure that more people have access to those, we need more models that meet different people's needs. And ACCII is a way to make sure that automakers actually deliver those vehicles to Massachusetts. The second point I want to make on this front ties back a little bit to the concept of equity as well, which is that ACCII only regulates the new vehicles that automakers deliver. And many people, most people, don't buy new cars, they buy used cars. And it has been a constraint in terms of access to EVs and the benefits of lower fuel and maintenance costs that we don't have a really built out used EV market yet. But ACCII is a key strategy in making sure that we can actually build out that robust used EV market, because as we increase the percent of new vehicles that are electric, a couple years down the line, we increase the percentage of vehicles on the used market that are electric. So both on the new front and on the used front, we need ACCII for consumer choice. And if we were to delay it, we would reduce that choice and access to vehicles that help people save money on operating costs. So we've gone through sort of the why we need ACC2 and all of the benefits of it, and we're going to transition now to the fact that Massachusetts is ready for implementation. As Kathy mentioned at the beginning, there's a federal onslaught against the regulatory framework that allows states to even have these regulations. And it's very clear on the federal level that it's automakers and the fossil fuel lobby that are behind that effort. But that effort is not only targeted at the federal administration, it is also happening at the state level. And governors across the country are under a lot of pressure to delay or weaken these regulations. But Massachusetts is ready. And so that's what the next couple slides are going to talk about. Starting again with Kathy to talk about the EV market more broadly.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, so I wanted to highlight on this slide that we're talking today about Massachusetts, and we've highlighted a little bit about what's happening at the national level. But this transition to zero emission and cleaner vehicles is not happening just in a vacuum here in the United States or just here in Massachusetts. This transition is happening globally. So I included this chart here to show just how we've been seeing this transition towards these cleaner vehicles accelerate over the past decade. And as you can see by this chart, frankly, the United States is behind some of our other global partners. And so really we're at this moment right now where we should be asking ourselves the question is, do we want to be a leader in this space? We have historically been a leader in the automotive industry and in the transportation space. So do we continue to be leaders as this transition is occurring globally and will continue to occur globally regardless of what we decide to do here? Or do we see that leadership and ultimately have to play catch up in a couple of years when it inevitably is clear that the transition to zero emission vehicles is where the industry is going. So I included this chart here, and I always want to put it in the context of that too, that we really are in a moment where it's important for us to show leadership in this space to make sure that we are reaping all of those benefits that Dave highlighted and Andrea highlighted, and importantly that we are staying economically competitive across the globe with our partners. But just another point here too is, we are continuing to see here in the United States, the market is continuing to increase. We're seeing sales and demand of electric vehicles continue to increase year over year. And in addition to just the raw numbers of vehicles increasing, we're also continuing to see the types of vehicles available for consumers to purchase increase as well. So to Anna's point on increasing customer choice, we've been seeing that in reality on the ground as well. Today, there's over 144 different models of electric vehicles that consumers can choose from, including trucks, SUVs, vans, sedans, etc. And we're continuing to see additional options come online year over year, as well as vehicles that have longer ranges and are able to go further distances without needing to charge. So there's a lot of encouraging signs in the market that help to show that ACC2 is feasible and can be supported through this transition. And as I said in the beginning, the importance of this regulation, even though we know this transition is occurring, is that these regulations provide a planned, phased, and clear approach for states like Massachusetts to be able to plan and implement complementary policies, infrastructure planning, etc., with these clear targets and goals in mind that will help to ultimately succeed as we consider this transition towards a cleaner transportation future.
You teed me up very nicely there for the next slide, which is all about what is Massachusetts doing. And I want to stress again that clean energy and climate plan that I talked about assumes that we're doing ACC2 and plans for it. And there's a whole apparatus of infrastructure planning, utility planning. All of this is operating on the assumption that we're getting to 900,000 by 2030, or that's the goal, and that we're using ACC2 to get there. So I wanted to take one slide to talk about the fact that ACC2 is not the only thing that's happening in Massachusetts, and that we have a suite of complementary policies to make it even more feasible and smooth for the market to adjust to ACC2. So again, if you've come to one of our EV 101 presentations before, this is probably familiar to you. We're not going to go into the details here, but broadly, we've got purchase incentives. We have the More EV program for individuals. We've got the More EV truck program for fleets. We've also got incentives for municipalities and other public entities through Mass EVIP and the Green Communities program. And these programs are longstanding and very popular and can help us through this sort of awkward growth period where some EVs are still more expensive than their gas equivalents, but these programs can help bridge that gap as the market progresses and as economies of scale bring those battery costs and those EV costs down. We've also got incentives to build out charging infrastructure, whether we're talking about home charging for single family homes, 2 to 4 unit family homes, 5+ unit homes. We've got incentives for charging at work and in public locations through utility programs from National Grid, Eversource, Unitil, and many of our municipal light plants, but also through the Department of Environmental Protection in the Mass EVIP program. We've got the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center funding lots of pilot programs to do what the market isn't doing on its own just yet and figure out how to make charging easier for fleets or on street for dense urban neighborhoods or for folks who drive for a living and have a disproportionate number of miles, so Uber, Lyft, and taxi drivers. The Clean Energy Center is piloting a lot of stuff to make this transition even smoother. And then we've got charging access requirements like a statewide right to charge, which means that if you live in a condo and you want to install a charging station where you park, you can't be prohibited from doing that for no good reason, which we've heard from folks in not just in condo associations, but in historical districts or things like that across the state. We want to make sure people have the right to charge if they want to make the switch. And then we've got a stretch energy code that has ambitious minimum requirements for EV charging and EV ready parking facilities. So basically making sure that if you're building a new building or building a new parking lot, that you build in from the get-go the electrical service that will need to install charging either immediately or a couple years down the line. So all of these incentives complement and support ACC2, but they cannot supplant it. And that's one key message that we're trying to get across, that these are not reasons to delay ACC2. These are reasons why we're going to succeed at ACC2 and don't need a delay. On infrastructure in particular, I want to let people know that we have a statewide electric vehicle infrastructure coordinating council named EVIC, which is thanks to the leadership of the TUE committee, basically, in the climate bill that passed a couple years ago. This is a council made up of representatives from all of the state agencies that touch EV charging one way or another. So you've got folks from the Department of Energy Resources, the Department of Transportation, Department of Environmental Protection. You've got folks from the Division of Standards. We've got folks from the MBTA, and they're all coming together to say, okay, if we need 900,000 vehicles to be electrified by 2030, what does that mean for how many charging stations we need, where they are, who has access to them, how we pay for them, how we build them, and they are working on their report. So 2 years ago, they wrote an initial report that they handed to the legislature. Now they're working on their second assessment. And I've been really heartened in all of the public meetings and public hearings that the stress from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs is, where are we now? Where do we need to be? And how are we going to get there? And who's going to do what? So not many states have this level of interagency coordination on this issue. And I think this sets us up well to implement ACC2. That brings us to taking some action. So we are going to walk through how to email and call Governor Maura Healey's office, but we want to have a couple concluding thoughts first and some time for Q&A before we launch into that. So the sort of long story short here is there's no sugarcoating this. Delaying ACC2 means that we would miss our required 2030 emissions reductions. Automakers and the fossil fuel industry are pushing hard, both at the federal and state level, to weaken, delay, or destroy the regulations, even though they've known that they're coming for years, even though the market is going electric. And even though, as Kathy talked about, there's so many flexibilities built into ACC2 that compliance is feasible. But we can take action to make sure Massachusetts doesn't delay while the fight is still happening at the federal level. I want to mention that this webinar is really targeted at individuals who want to take action, and we're going to do that together. But there's a very long and growing list of organizations that have signed on to a letter directed at Governor Maura Healey, saying basically everything that we've gone over in this webinar, and really urging Massachusetts to stay strong in the face, excuse me, of all this pressure. So far we've got 68 organizations that are from all parts of the state. We've got environmental and environmental justice organizations. We've got labor and housing organizations. We've got community organizations. We've got statewide organizations. And so this is just a screenshot. I'll let you kind of glaze over this list, but we'll share a link in the follow-up email that you can read the letter and see all the folks that have signed on. But this is a quick plug of if you are part of an organization that would like to sign on to this letter, please send me an email. We submitted one version of this letter on Monday, but we've gotten more signups this week, so we'll resubmit it tomorrow. So if you would like to sign on, please send me an email and I will more than happily add you to the list before we resubmit it tomorrow. But with that, we're going to pause for a moment for any questions before we go over how to take action. And I know that there are a couple in the chat. Kathy, Andrea, and Dave, if you've seen a question that you want to take while I catch up, go for it. Otherwise, I can open this up and catch up real quick. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, there was a question there about sort of like I think it was around the announcement of a small electric pickup truck by Slate that is coming out, and I think that's an important point is that that having that is something that doesn't exist right now in the market, and that's exactly sort of the thing that ACC2 is trying to drive all the automakers to is to provide more options. And so, right now, there are electric vehicle options that are growing, but we need electric vehicle options that are like at different sizes, different kinds of vehicles, and at different price points, especially the lower price points. And what we've seen so far in the EV market is that like a lot of times a traditional automaker will start with a vehicle that is electric, but they'll also put a lot of other things that have nothing to do with the electric drivetrain in the vehicle, massive display screens or self-driving technology that drive up the cost of the car, and they're not providing that lower cost EV option, and that the ACC2 rules help make sure that those options that not just the option to go electric, but at different price points and with different capabilities.
Thanks, Dave. I will jump up to one question. Some of you may have seen an article this morning in WBUR about how various policymakers, both in the legislative and the executive branch in Massachusetts, are reconsidering climate policies in Massachusetts. And the question is, how angry and worried should I be? You should be concerned. I think we are all concerned here, and this is part of the reason why we're having this webinar. So here we're talking about one very specific policy, but it's true that the chaos at the federal level is causing people to pause and think. And so now is a time where we really need to stress that we need to keep moving forward on climate action. The fact that the benefits of acting on climate outweigh the costs, and the fact that we are seeing and will continue to see a lot of human suffering if we don't move on this transition. None of those facts have changed. So if you read that article and want to call your state rep and call your state senator and call the governor's office and say, I'm really worried about this, we need to keep moving forward, please do. And we'll talk about how to do that on this particular policy once we get through the Q&A. I see another question about who exactly is pushing back on ACC2. in the state. I wonder, Kathy, do you want to take this? I'm happy to take this, but I wanted to give you a chance because you've also got a view of across states what's happening.
Yeah. So I think to the last part of this question, this is true, that this is clearly a coordinated attack across all the different states. I said that the transition's not happening in a vacuum in Massachusetts, and the opposition is also not happening in a vacuum in Massachusetts. We are seeing this pop up and these same arguments happening in every single state, which is, really disappointing to see. And it's a lot of times coming at the very end of a legislative session or things like that, where there's very little time to respond to some of the misinformation or disinformation campaigns that are occurring. So, I think as Anna highlighted in the presentation, it's coming from oil industry lobbyists and groups, as well as automakers and their dealerships too. So this argument that was flagged in the Q&A of threatening to hold fewer internal combustion engines in order to meet compliance is a threat that we've heard elsewhere as well, although there's no indication that that has actually taken place anywhere. Again, within all of the different flexibilities within the regulation, there's no reason for an automaker to make that decision to do that. It seems to me as just like a very strong threat in order to cause folks to reconsider these regulations. But based off of the flexibilities that are already within this rule, there should be no reason for automakers to make that decision. Although I will say that these regulations do not direct business decisions. So if an automaker chooses on their own accord for this business decision to do that, I think it's a silly reason to do it, but this regulation is really just helping to drive the number of zero emission vehicles available for sale in these states. And I should also say again, this is statewide; it's not dealership specific. So automakers can choose to send these vehicles to the dealerships that have more interest in electric vehicles initially. There's no need to send 100% zero emission vehicles to all dealerships across the whole entire state. So again, there's lots of flexibilities in these rules, but these arguments are not new or unique in Massachusetts, and it's very clearly a coordinated attack across all states.
So there's a couple questions in the chat of is there why would we roll this back? Is there specific evidence that we're rolling this back? I will say that in the advocacy circles I sit in, so I talk to a lot of advocates in Massachusetts, but also across the country. There's a lot of chatter on the grapevine, quite frankly. When the regulations were adopted back in 2023, there was a public comment period. And so we and many other advocates in Massachusetts spoke at that public comment session at the Department of Environmental Protection. And that was all open to the public. You can see all the comments that were made. And you could see that some entities don't, quite frankly, auto dealers and automakers rather, if they can get away with not being regulated, they would prefer fewer regulations than more regulations. And on the national level, the fossil fuel industry knows that electrification is a threat to their business model. So they've got a clear incentive to push back on these. What we've heard in the last couple of months has all been a little bit more hush-hush. And what we're doing with this webinar is getting out ahead of it. There's nothing specific that has been stated publicly, but we've heard enough from advocates locally and across the country to be concerned, which is why we want to get out in front of that, make a lot of noise, and really stress that we can't do this. The other thing I'll note is that one of the states that had adopted ACCII, Maryland, delayed it without any public comment period. So the executive branch basically just made an announcement a couple weeks or months ago and said, we're going to just not enforce ACCII. That's it. We've decided. We're done now. And that is really dangerous. We don't want to see that happen in Massachusetts because that meant there was no opportunity for advocates and experts to speak up and say the things like we've been saying here about there's no need. There's lots of flexibilities. We need this for public health, for equity, for climate. And so that's why we're doing this webinar today, to really make sure we can get out ahead of anything like that, specifically in Massachusetts. We only have about 10 minutes left and we have about a dozen more questions. What I'm going to do is go through the how to actually take action piece with help from Tina. And then if there's time at the end, we can go back to questions, and we've got all our email addresses up on the screen for a reason. So if you ask the question that we didn't get to answer, I'm sorry we didn't have enough time to do that, but please feel free to send us an email. And we'll get back to you, and we'll also go through the questions before we send out the email after the webinar to see if there's any we didn't get a chance to answer. Are there resources we can send your way in writing? So with that, we're going to go through how to actually take action, and we'll do it together. So step one is, if you are a Massachusetts resident, you can email Governor Maura Healey. Tina will paste into the chat a link which gets you to an automatic form that you can fill out. So you'll get to a page. If you scroll down a little bit, you'll see the form on the right here. And step one is obviously to fill in your contact information. On the next slide, we'll paste in, we'll show you a template, and Tina will paste the text of the template into the chat as well. But we'll just sit on this slide for a minute together and let everybody open up that link and paste in this text. So Tina, if you haven't already, if you could paste the text into the chat for everybody. I'll say that at the end of this text, there is a fill in the blank. We definitely encourage you to give a specific example close to you about why you want to take action and why you care. So you could say, I'm concerned about a delay in ACCII because I want my next car to be electric and I want to make sure I have access to all of the best vehicle models. You can say, I care about air quality in my community. You can talk about your personal experience with air quality and health issues. You can talk about climate and future generations, really whatever it is that motivated you to come to this webinar today and take action. Please put that in, because the more personalized these messages can be, the better. I'll just pause here for another minute. I don't know, Kathy, Dave, or Andrea, if you have anything you'd like to say to fill in this chunk of time while people copy and paste and write a letter to Maura Healey.
No, just thank you. And I think it's incredibly important to take action and to let the governor know that people are paying attention to this issue and that people care about this policy. So thank you for all of you who are copying and pasting out of the chat and taking action.
I will move on one slide, and then maybe we can go back to some of the questions while we just keep the next couple slides up. But emailing is easy. You don't have to talk to a human, but calling is really effective. And so on the next slide, we'll have a script again and a phone number. I will say I called the governor's office last week and it went to voicemail, so I did not have to talk to a human. I wouldn't mind talking to a human, but I know some people are nervous about talking to a human when you're calling to make a pitch for something. But on the next slide, we'll have a script again. It's very similar to the email script. Again, if you can personalize it and say why you're calling, please do. When you call, if you do get the recording, it will ask you to leave a number for a call back from the governor's team. Do that if you feel comfortable. If you don't, you don't have to. But if you can stress, I'm a constituent, I'm a resident of this zip code, that will make your message more effective. So I'll leave this slide up for a moment. And if you want to mute the webinar and call, you can do that. We'll also send out instructions after the webinar for how to do this on your own time. Oh, I am learning that you all can't copy the text from the chat. That's really unfortunate. Tina, would you mind putting it into the Q&A?
Yes, I answered the first question that I had seen that came from Aline, and that had been moved to the answered tab. So in my answer to that attendee, it should have the script, but keep letting us know if you're unable to copy that text.
And thanks to Ed for the note to paste this into the Q&A instead of the chat. Please do let us know if that worked. I hope it did. Okay. Oops, that's not the button I meant to press at all. So I'll end here and say thank you all for joining us today. We will send out a link to the webinar recording, a link to the email form to email Governor Healy, and a link to the landing page at the bottom of this slide. This will lead you to all these templates, all these links, so you can take action from there. And I'll say if you enjoyed this, and thanks to those of you who said that it worked in the Q&A, I appreciate the validation there. Send this to 3 friends that you think would care. And when you do that, say, I took action on this because I care about blank. I think you care about blank too. This takes 3 minutes. I can walk you through how to do it if you need a hand, but this is really important. And I think, especially in light of all of the bad news on this front, that kind of personal relational touch is really incredibly important. So with that, I'm going to thank Kathy, Andrea, and Dave very, very much for joining us today. Tina for staffing the chat. And I don't know, Kathy, Andrea, or Dave, if you have any last thoughts. Otherwise, we can close this out.
Just want to say thank you all for attending this webinar and appreciate all of your support to help clean up the air here in Massachusetts.
Yes, thank you so much.
Cool. Well, with that, oh, sorry, Andrea, go ahead.
Just the same thing. Thanks so much for joining. Thanks for being advocates for clean air and clean vehicles. And we hope this was helpful to anybody and everybody who came.
And I'll end by saying when we send you this confirmation email, if you did take action, please let us know. It will make our days brighter to know that you filled out the form or called the governor and sent this out to your friends. So thank you all again very much, and you will hear from us very soon. Take care.